This is code.org, and here's my awesome example performance task application. So let me show you what I'm doing. I hit run, and you can type in a state, hit search, and this is the input. It's going to pop up with team names and then the actual names of universities. Let's do another one. Washington State is where I went to school. Let's hit search, and again. All right, so what I'm going to do here, I'm going to detail my application and similar, and my written response. I'll also go over how to record a video of your app and how to get your code into PDF form, both of which are required. Some of this is similar to what code.org already does. They provide you a video example, written response, annotated, a lot of information that is really helpful. Now, again, this is to prepare you for the task itself. Your task must be on its own and it must be your work. I wanted to build upon what code.org has to make sure we are all set to go to really knock this performance task out of the park. Let's get started. This is code.org, and it is review for our performance task time. Now, this is another way your resources or content might look. It depends on what course you are in, but this is the same material. It's organized a bit differently. So how I got to this one, if you don't have bubbles, you could click on lesson resources, and that would get you here as well. All right, so performance task is totally on your own, and you're going to rock it. But code.org does provide a ton of useful resources to take a look at before you're actually involved in creating your own. They have an example video, they have full written responses, and then they annotate why those responses are graded in the manner that they are. Now, they have a ton of great stuff. I wanted to provide one of my own examples in the same format that they are here, just like they do, but I want to walk through my own. So let's go ahead and take a look. Here is the code that I have, and this code is based on what we have been learning throughout the year. Actually, if you take a look at this video, it's in many ways very close to the word game app that we made earlier this year. So with that being said, let me go ahead and start with you need a PDF of your code. So it's not really easy to see, am I going to do print? How am I going to do this? What I do is select all. Right? With every selected, I can copy this to the clipboard. Now, you could take it to Microsoft Words, things of this nature. You could also, if you're using Google for stuff, you could go to a new tab and just do docs.new, and I can just paste my code right there. And now, AP, CS, code, whatever you need to title it, I can do file, I can download, and now I have a nice PDF of the code that I have created. Let me show you what my application does in general, then the video, how to make a video from it, and let's go over how some of the ways they created their own written response and what you want to focus on. So first off, what this application does is it makes, let me run, boom, and put in a state. I have some listed here. Sure, so let me hit run, and I'll put in a state, Washington, I went to school in Seattle, boom, and it's going to display. So let me go ahead and hit run, and I'll put in a state, Washington, I went to school in Seattle, and it's going to display the NCAA, school names, and then their Go Huskies and their teams. And I can try another state, Ohio, because it's short, search, and it's going to do the same, school name and the corresponding team with it. How this is happening, I'm using data, I'm grabbing, which is required for this project, that you want to use a list. And the data that I am using, shockingly, is the division teams. What I am grabbing, and if this is already confusing to you, you really want to go back and double check some of the work we've done this year. This is completely doable, but what I'm grabbing is the team nickname, the state, and the university name. How I'm doing that is I say variable school list is going to be equal to NCAA division, university, team nickname, and state. Keep in mind for your images, you do want to make sure to cite everything. This is the grown-up world now, well, almost, and these are the citations for my images here. That being said, now with these lists populated with the data, I need two lists for filtering, because keep in mind, I am looping through a list and I'm grabbing out data, I'm grabbing the schools that are from that state to output to the screen. Now on event, state text input, that's this, change, I'm going to go ahead and filter. And you can see that here. And so once I click off of it, it's going to auto search. Now, this is good if they write it the whole time. It's actually why I originally put a search button. So I might even change this. It might be more appropriate because if they only do partials answers, you're going to want to wait until they actually click your button. So maybe I'll do search button click. Regardless, you want to make sure that the application allows user interaction. And that's what this is going to do. Now, when they do click search now, it's going to filter data. What's that? My function here. My function is my procedure. So the requirements for this say that you must be using at least one procedure. Don't freak out. That's going to be your function. I have it named filter data, for instance. Maybe yours is named pick a year. I don't know, but that's your procedure. Now, what's my parameter here? I originally had 2. Now I have 1. It's just the state. State is the name of the state the school/team located in. I'm using these comments to make it clear what my application is doing. It's also useful in the written task later on. Show element, search image, that's just a hourglass symbol. Now, team filtered list is empty because I want to point this at nothing first, because if there is other data in here, I need to wipe it out. So I wipe out my team filtered list and school filtered list. I then use a for loop starting at 0, I is equal to 0, and I loop through all of the data that I have. The state list is what I use, or the school list, either way. No, the school list is used because I want to get the length of it. I know I have to go through every school in my list. And so I starts at 0 because list starts at index 0. I know this says 1. Every list starts at index 0. So this is index 0, 1, 2. This also in the university list or the school list would be index 0, 1, 2. And so I start there and I start looking. Hey, state list I put the whole thing in lowercase in case they entered all of theirs in lowercase or uppercase. It won't matter. Look at the state list I. So look at all that list of states. If it's equal to the state they entered, lowercase that as well, then my blank empty team list, go ahead and add the team at that location to it, append it, push it into it. So now if the state was Ohio and I'm at index 1, it says, oh yeah, Ohio matches. So I'm going to append the name zips and the university to that list. Finally, and if there's no matches, I output this, right? So if the list is empty, this is what gets output. Something you might really want to consider, we are asked about calling the function at 2 different points. And, right, so calling it like we do here on filtered data, and this is going to call the function once. Now, what about when we ask the function to run again with a set of data that might produce a different result? So to ensure that happens, you could do a few things. Else is a great way because now we know that there is going to be some event that causes a different part of the code to run, right? So if the team list is 0, this must run, but that will only occur when it's 0. And if we put an else here, we can make sure that there will be 2 separate things because only this part of the code could run if this was true, or this part if it was false. Now, if it was false, we could do all sorts of things, but just to make sure there is a difference being made here, maybe I'll say at the end of my results, and this might not even be the best example, but I just want to give you an idea. Append item, team filtered list, right? And end of list. Boom. Okay, so that will just be appended to the end of team filter, which might make sense. Maybe I want to append it to both of our lists, right? All right, you just definitely want to have 2 different ways your application can run and the 2 different results as your function calls. We'll get into that. Let me undo what I've done here. And then I'm going to go ahead and hide my search image and set the output here. Now, this is just for an example. Guys, if you use outside resources, you really want this project to be of your own doing. But for instance, we didn't learn about a push method. So I'm not going to actually have this used, but you want to make sure to cite any code with a source that you make use of. Cheating is cheating, right? So the AP exam and graders can find YouTube videos or code on the internet or whatever resources you're trying to get by them, and it will impact your future. Make sure if you are using outside resources, one, double check that you really need to use those. You should be building this on your own. If it's super critical, you need to be very clear about what it is. This just adds cool coders to everything. So, Oregon search, cool coders. But again, that was just to show you. All right, this is my application. So now I need a video of it, and then I need a written response. Let's head that direction. Now that we know a bit about the program, you're going to need a video. And here's their example of a well-done video. You might recognize this program. All you want to show is user input and then how this application is going to respond, just like they are, right? They're showing different types of input, which are calling their method, their function, their procedure, and it's having their screen update. So the input would be a drop down. It could be the person writing something. It could be hitting a button, anything that allows the user to enter data and change what's on the screen. I want to point out they're using screencastomatic. Very good tool. I also want to point out their video is 23 seconds. We can probably see details. You don't want, look how tiny that is. 223 kilobytes. You want it under 30 megabytes. So honestly, that shouldn't be a problem if you're using something like screencastomatic. That being said, let me show you screencastomatic. So, here, let me show you two of them. Screencastify can be added to Chrome. It's also a good tool. You can just hit add to Chrome. That wasn't what I was going to demo though. Let me magic my way back over to Google. I'm just going to hammer in Screencastomatic. Here we are. And this is the resource that they use to capture their own video. Screencastomatic. And all I have to do is hit record for free. Make sure you don't have any pop-up blockers enabled because it might not launch if you do. Launch free recorder. This is a really easy tool to use to get this done. And make sure you have a quality product to show off and send of your app. So once I launch it, this is going to pop up, which is awesome. I'm going to go ahead and close that, close that. Here's the app. Now, if I want to make sure to show it off, first, actually, you don't want sound here. So I'm going to make sure that's off and computer audio, all of this needs to be off. Now, I want to show just my app. I don't need to show all this stuff for it. A real easy way to make that happen is I'm going to hit share. Once I do, I don't need to publish it, but I can go ahead and right click, copy this link, and then paste it into my browser. I'm going to go ahead and say go to. And with all this set up, make sure you don't have narration. You don't want either of these sounds enabled. Your video should not have sound in any form. So those are both X'd. I'm going to hit record. And my only goal here is to show off what my app can do, how it responds to input. So I have it set to Teams. That's fine. I don't know, H. And what will happen here is this top section is the team name, Hoosiers, Hawkeyes. And then down here, it is the universities that are affiliated, Hoosiers, Indiana, so on and so forth. Now I can also, for instance, do like schools. And notice now it's going to load all the school names that start with H and those teams. So this is showing my input or the user's input, and that will be sufficient. You want to keep these to under a minute. So here I am right now at 36 seconds. I'm hitting pause. I've showed off the functionality of my app. Let me now hit done, and it provides me with a couple options. I don't really need to edit this video, so I'm just going to click save/upload. What will happen is this. Now I have all of these options. Again, I'm just going to go ahead and save the file directly. This is fine. I'll title it my NCAA team app demo. Something straightforward, and I'm going to go ahead and hit publish. I need to select where it will be saved. I'm going to put it somewhere I can remember because otherwise, well, I won't remember. Sure, I'll leave mine in documents and publish. Now, I have a recording of my application. So that is perfect. That's, well, needed. At this point, now that I have that recording, now we want to be thinking about our written response for this. I am going to use, they have their highest scoring application is sample 1. You really should be looking at these resources, and your content might appear in two different ways. Regardless, these resources, They even have the example annotated so you can see why this would score so highly, right? It's perfect. They show you screenshots, they explain it all. Be sure to use that. That being said, here is, and it's this, I just made a copy of their sample one with their information. I'm going to start putting some bullet points how I would word this for the application that I have made, just to kind of point you in the right direction of how to do this. Obviously, this isn't answers. I'm not even going to be as detailed as them. So describe the purpose. Make sure you say what your app does. Also mention why. If I just say, my app gives you team names. No, right? So I don't know, you kind of want to sell it a bit while being reasonable. So my app allows the user to easily find school names based on state, right? Be straightforward. Don't make it super flowery. Code is meant to be direct and efficient. Now for this, describe the functionality the video illustrates. Point number 1, the video illustrates. Okay, that's great that your app was going to send everyone on a pirate adventure and fulfill their dreams and light unicorns on fire with happy dragons of happy fireness or whatever. If your video doesn't show it, don't say it. And if your video doesn't show it and you need your video to show it, go redo your video. Okay, describe what the functionality shows. What it needs to show, make sure it shows user input. And whether that is text, drop downs, buttons, I don't care. It needs to show user input and then output. How does your app respond / react / change? That's what you want to have happen. And this hits upon that. Describe the input and output. So you want to make sure this is in the video and describe what's happening. So you wouldn't just say there's user input. For me, I would say something like the user can type in the name of the state, right? Describe the input and output, blah, blah, blah. So here now I might be like the user's input. I can be more explicit. The input gathered from the user would be a state name. And I could even point out the press of a button and the press of a button, right? And then the output is whatever your app does just on. Output would be the 2 filtered lists displayed, blah, 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 after the user has done that. Capture and paste the program segment developed by, oh, this sounds scary. Where is your list? If you have a list, and you should, that you're making from a data set, use it, and you should. So here's my data set, right? Let me go to the top here. Boom, easy peasy. Mine's on line 4. I'm going to use school list. I could also use team list. Boom. That's what they're looking for here. And I'm not going to use their fancy image saying I'm going to do that. Now, what they want now is the second code segment must show the data and the same list is being processed. So you're gathering this info. How is it being manipulated, used, changed? And again, that's easy. They're showing, if you're not entirely certain, look for your for loop. It's very likely, or a conditional somewhere, an if statement. That's where you're doing something to change up what is being displayed. So if you're just putting out an entire list that you grabbed, that's not the goal here, right? That's not what you want to do. But where are you making a change to that? Mine would be here. Well, specifically, I'm going to put this stuff where I search through and I use the if statement, right? And we can use, again, code.org as an excellent example. They go all the way down to the set text. They're using their whole function. So I'll just kind of, follow their lead. Okay, right click copy, boom. All right, boom and boom. Now, identify the names of the list being processed in response. So on line 1, called word list, word database stores each is being stored in a string. So a string is just a fancy way to say any word, right? It's just not a number. A sentence or a word is a string. It's a variable. So for me, I have 2 of these because I'm using state. I am using 3 of them. I'm using the state, the school, and the team. So you just want to, any list that you are using in your app from the data table. Almost any. Identifies the name of list being processed in the response. So what lists are you looping through and changing, grabbing, to update the user. So that's what goes here. Identify what data contained in the list is representing in your program. So what is that data representing to my program? If the user selects the length of blah, 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 every element of length 2. So really, they're literally describing what that data is. For me in my application, and I'm not going to write this whole thing, but it's asking you how you're doing this, right? How is it represented? Identify the data contained in the list that's being shown. So my data will be the school and the team. And what is it that data being shown? Not all of it, right? I'm filtering. So I'm saying, oh yeah, I'm going to loop through, and this is done by iterating, looping, transversing, all the same thing. I'm going through a list here and matching the state to if the state matches, I'm grabbing that list and that team. So you're saying how you're whittling the data down or how it's being changed by you and displayed. Explain how select list manages complexity in your program by explaining why the program code could not be written or how it would be differently if you did not use a list. For me, I would not write out all of those teams' names. So how does a list manage complexity? It allows me to ask the computer to do something that personally I would not do. And let's look at their example. The word list manages complexity because it allows any number of words to be stored in the list. Lists or arrays are actually limited by a data limit of size, but we won't get into that. It's nothing you need to worry about in being nerdy. Instead of using individual variables for each word. Right, yeah. Think how if we had to store every school in an individual variable, it would be exhausting to process. Okay? So it would be far too long. It would not only be far too long, we would have to have, for my particular program, I used 3 different lists. We'd have to have so many variables, and then we'll have to be comparing, checking, using conditionals on a variety of them. So think how having a list and working through it, whether you're using 1 or 10, is limiting down, is making your life easier. And that's what they mean by complexity. What if you didn't have a list? How would that change things? Why is it good that you have one? The first program code segment must be student developed procedure, blah, 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 blah. And so what they did here is put their whole function, and I did that earlier because I was kind of copying off of what they were showing in their example. So if I wanted to be more specific here, I could. Segment data being processed. So maybe this like show image isn't actually processing data. So I could pare this down some. Regardless, here. That's my whole function. That's my procedure. The second program segment show where the student developed a procedure. Look for your function called in the program. Now, where is it called? So where do I ask this to run? I ask it to run on my event. So on event, line 12, and you might want to write the line itself here. Then provide a written response that does describe in general what the select procedure does, how it contributes. Notice how succinct, notice how short this is. They just want you to show them, hey, do you know what's going on here? And if you do, they're happy with it. Okay, so again, I'm just describing, yep, it filters down, it uses this, this procedure uses input string state name, filters team schools based on state entered. So you just want to describe what's going on. And again, I'm not going into a ton of detail. I could probably be a bit more clear here, but really your broad overview. Okay, explain in detailed steps how algorithm implementation of the select procedure accomplishes it. Enough for someone else to recreate it. So they need to not see your code and know how to do it. Line 16, and this is great, highly recommend using lines here, shows and hides the image. I actually do the same in my program. So the terminology for stuff like this, I'm going to go back. Algorithm implemented for this select procedure. So right here, I hide an image too, just in case it's going to take a lot of time. So for me, that's line 18. So what I would highlight here, go through it line by line, go through line by line, okay? Make sure to mention filter / sort / map, all of that stuff that you're actually going to be doing to your list. So make sure you're mentioning what's going on in that way. Now, when you are doing this, are you looping? Because language you can use to say loop is to transverse a list, go through, iterate, which is just that I++ over a list. All of these things would work for terminology. So think about how you're explaining how you're going through that list. The if statement, and we could use fancy language here, the if statement on line 21, you do want to make sure to point out any conditionals, if statements that you have, and what they do. What if they are true? What if they are false? And then, how does your function / procedure end? Is there a return? Is your screen updated? What if no data is there? These are things you really need to answer for a succinct answer on this. Answer for an answer. All right, describe two calls in the select procedure identify. Each call must pass different arguments that causes the different segment of your code in the algorithm to execute. Okay, so describe two calls to select procedure identified in your written response. 3C. All right, and so here is this. And how could we call it? Well, let's suppose the user selects dropdown. I don't have a dropdown, and the letter D. Okay, let's suppose you're just saying what someone could do. A user enters Ohio, right? In the text input box, right? What could they do? And I would need to change this one as well. Describe what conditions, what if, when you see conditions, think if, is being tested by each call to the procedure. The argument is a fancy word for parameter, guys. It means, well, a parameter is when, I can show you. This is a parameter. This, when I make my function, I call this state. When I use this, I use this state's a parameter, and I use it throughout this, right? When I say state down here, I mean whatever I used here. Now, what this is going to be, when do I run filter data? Right here, get text state input. What is get text state input? It's whatever they typed into this box. Okay, well, filter data, boom, state. State's the parameter, but the argument, so when I actually ask this function to run, what is called the argument is whatever's representing whatever the parameter is going to be filled with. So if I do right here, filter data Ohio, well then state, once filter data runs, state, the parameter's name is state, but the argument I am passing is Ohio. This is the argument, Ohio. The parameter that it's going into is state. Kind of confusing, and they like using terminology like this. Okay, the argument passed through, so conditions tested by the first call. And watch what they're doing. The argument passed through the filter would be, so I can use similar language. The user entering Ohio would become, this would get passed as an argument, okay? And then you need to detail step by step what's going on. So once I say that's passed, what's going to happen to it? And I will walk them through this for loop. I'd walk them through comparing. You want to show them what is going on within that procedure. So when it is called, when you ask it to run, walk them through step by step what will be taking place. Make sure your examples are actually going to run different parts of your code. So I wouldn't want to give two fully working examples if the identical part of code is going to run each time. Meaning if I write Ohio in here, this runs, it will find the schools and output them here. If I write Washington, it will run just fine. That's a state. Now what happens when I write blah, 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 blah? Well, that would be an issue, right? So what would happen then is it's not going to find any schools successfully, and it's going to output this alternative, result. Whereas if the length is 0, this will happen. You must make sure that when you talk about your two procedures, your two function calls, that one of them runs a certain part of the code, and your second one must run, it could run mostly the same code, but it has to do something different. One way to ensure that different stuff happens, this will work as is, but maybe I would put an else here, and that way I know no matter what, either this part, if it's true, if the length 0, this will happen. And now what if it's successful? I don't know, there's all sorts of stuff. I talked about this earlier. Maybe I just append the word success to the beginning of my list. And that way only if it's true, right? So only if the length is more than 0, maybe I grab my team filtered list here and I say at index 0, I'm just going to have the word, I don't know, results. And that way I know there will be a distinction in my code that must occur, or a result. The comma might throw this off. It's up to you, but you could put an else here that makes it clear that you understand the distinction. And that way you can make sure to mention 2 areas where your code runs. Doing a join with a comma would throw this off, so maybe at the end I would just append end of a list. Anyway, that can show you clearly understand the differences, and this alone will fulfill it, right? Because we have code that this will only execute when there's no info available. So just make sure you're using 2 function calls that do different stuff to some degree. All right, now, and before we move on with all that being said, so I've already added, let's suppose a user enters Ohio in the text input box. That would be the first time my function's called. And then I would want to describe how it would retrieve the schools and the teams from Ohio. And then in the second call box here, this is where I would put what's running the other part of the code. So what if they enter a fake state? Well, that output will be something like my catch for that. We didn't find any states or any schools, check your spelling. So first call does one thing, and then make sure your next call is doing or running a different part of the code. All right. And now, what would be the, describe what conditions were tested in the procedure. So the procedure, again, was my initial function. Condition, never let that scare you. They mean an if statement. An if statement. So, condition tested by the first call. Well, that first call, I'm going to test whether the state matches the one entered. So Ohio was entered. The condition... Notice I'm even writing if, because it's an if. If the state name matches the user entered 1, comma, the index of the state name is then used to add the university and team name to other lists. So you are literally just walking them through what your if is doing. My if, it checks the state name. If that's successful, it will then add them to these other lists. And then the second call, what was my second example? Well, inputting another state. Or maybe I'll say inputting a partial state, or inputting a non-match, because if they put in a non-match, that would be a different result, because nothing would be found after all that. So you want to describe what happens. Just remember, conditionals are ifs. All right, result of the first call. Okay, and I didn't actually get into result because I said the index. So the condition being checked, sure. And I might repeat myself a bit here just to make sure I cover my bases with expectations. And here's their example. After the for loop finishes, any word that has a length starting with 3. So maybe I won't. Okay, so after the, or just to make sure, the loop is used to iterate over data and check for the condition. After that, the 2 lists that now contain a filtered result of team and university names will be output to the text display areas. Something like this. Again, you're just describing what it's doing. Do not overthink this. All right, and then the second call, again, if I was going to use my example of bad data, I would say, well, then after that loop or whatever, what happens is that other conditional and it says, we did not find that state, check spelling, and that would be output. So I would, again, just be explaining exactly what that application is doing. The most important thing with this is having that strong application. You don't need it overcomplicated, but you need it to be clear to the grader that you understand and do meet these expectations. Armed with a good app, the rest of this will come easy. If you're at this point, you have put in a lot of hard work this year. I know you are going to do awesome on this. Make sure it is your own work, your own ideas, and be confident in what you produce. You will rock it. Good luck.